Good afternoon and welcome to the Urban and Regional Planning Speaker Series, Beyond Greenways. My name is Michelle Garza and I lead the Urban and Planning Student Association, working with Sam Rueda, UTSA's Urban and Regional Planning Professional Development Chair, and Dr. Wei Zhai, our faculty advisor, and Dr. Esteban Lopez Ochoa, both URP professors. We are happy to bring you this event with Robert Searns. He's going to speak to us today about greenways and his experience and lessons learned from his new book, Beyond Greenways. We're also really excited to welcome our local panelist, Brandon Ross from the City of San Antonio Parks and Recreation Department. He's going to be talking about the Howard Peak Greenway trails. Then we are happy to welcome also Rebecca Krug from the San Antonio River Authority. And she's going to be talking to us today about her project, Westside Creeks Ecosystem Restoration. And then lastly, we have Skye Curd, a local community member from the Westside Creek Oversight Committee. And she's going to be talking about her role as the co-chair of the Ecosystem Restoration Project Oversight Committee. So as urban and regional planning master students and faculty at UTSA, the reason we want to put on these events and why we study urban and regional planning is to really better understand how to collaborate with our partners and community members to create a healthier and more resilient, equitable, and environmentally and socially just community. One way to achieve many of these goals is to ensure equitable access to healthy greenways. Through this seminar, we hope that you gain a deeper understanding of the role greenways have in our community, what work is being done locally, and how you can get involved. Now I'm excited to introduce Robert Searns.
Thank you, Michelle.
So really quick, maybe I can just give a little overview of your illustrious career. Robert has a 4-decade history of visualizing, planning, and getting trails and greenway projects built. He was project director of Denver's Platte River and Mary Carter Greenways, both national award-winning projects. He helped plan the Grand Canyon National Park Greenway, played a key role on the Memphis Wolf River Greenway. He co-authored Greenways, a guide to planning, design, and development, and contributed to Greenways, the beginning of an international movement. His most recent book, Beyond Greenways, published by Island Press, is cited by the American Society of Landscape Architects as one of the 10 best books in 2023. He has written for Planning, Landscape, Architecture, LA China, and American Trails magazines. He has been a keynote speaker in the United States and Asia, and a trainer for the U.S. National Park Service and the Urban Land Institute. He has chaired American Trails and was a founder of the World Trails Network, as well as being a delegate to the America's Great Outdoor White House Conclave. He resides, writes, and hikes and bikes near Denver, which is why he's coming us today virtually. Robert, take it away.
Thank you, Michelle.
My pleasure.
And we'll go ahead to the next slide. Thank you. And in our discussions prior to the session, we talked about the evolution of greenways in a more general way and some of the kinds of challenges that we look at. And this includes, first and foremost, in my mind, providing a great recreational experience. In some ways, I like to say we're really ultimately in the entertainment business. We want to compose a great experience when we design and build these facilities for the people that will use them. And we want to emphasize the notion of diverse, equitable access to all the facilities that we build. We're always concerned and put at the forefront issues of safety, crime, climate factors, and particularly just feeling safe, the perception of feeling safe and secure when you're out using an outdoor facility. We want what we build to be sustainable and ecologically compatible with the surroundings. I always like to say we want to leave it better than we found it, the setting where we build these improvements. We want to look at, of course, affordability and whether it's practical to implement the ideas that we visualize. We always want to be aware of the community and public input and know what the community wants. And communities have all kinds of different sectors of groups with different interests. So we want to have a broad net that we cast to get as wide a range of input from people as we can. We always want to design with operations and maintenance involved. If you can't maintain it, I think we don't build it. So that's a very important thing too, is O&M. And then connectivity, that's not only accessibility, but linking to places, other systems, and even some of these corridors, in fact, foremost, some of these corridors should be active travel routes. And by active travel, I mean traveling by foot or by bicycle, non-motorized means that also promote fitness to get to our destinations, whether it's work or a friend's house or a corner restaurant or a library. Next slide. Let's talk a little bit about the evolution of what I like to think of green space as an adaptive urban form. Really for millennia, since we've had cities, people have thought about how we can have places of relief and solace from our day-to-day world in our environment. And this goes back even to the boulevards of ancient China, and also thinking about what evolved in the parkways and then the greenway ecological movement. And lastly, I'll talk about where I see it going today. Next slide. And as I said, ancient China, they were laying these places out. People could just get out into a civic space. Later on, we have the boulevards of France that are probably one of the most famous examples of the boulevard notion. These were wonderful civic spaces with greenery and places for people to promenade and see each other. That idea then came to North America, even when Washington, D.C. was laid out, and many other cities have boulevards, just beautiful landscape places where people could be out and about. And the next logical step from that was when Olmsted brought the next generation of parkways. And this was in, about 130 or 40 years ago when Frederick Law Olmsted introduced the notion of parkways, which really was an adaptation of the boulevard concept, where he believed in connecting civic spaces and parks together with beautifully landscaped parkways. One of the great examples is in Buffalo, New York. There's other ones all around the country of Olmsted corridors that people used. And an interesting thing, I know I mentioned the notion of people seeking solace and relief with green infrastructure. And back in the mid and late 19th century, it was an era of industrialization. Many of the people were working in grimy places, factories and places, and so they could get out of that kind of gray existence into greenery. And that's what Olmsted saw. He was very interested in public health and the health and well-being of the population. And then we look at the next stage, which I like to call the third generation of greenways. And in my opinion, that started around the mid-70s, and it's still evolving. It's become a worldwide movement. There are greenways just about everywhere now. And I think greenways were a green counterpoint to the domination of the automobile, which after the 1950s really began to become, kind of another form of almost oppression in our outdoor spaces, the noise and the barriers and not being able to move about safely because automobiles were everywhere. And greenways began to follow river corridors and stream corridors and abandoned rail lines which were in a way separated from automobile traffic. So they were kind of a place of relief and solace, green solace from the automobile dominated world. And as we look at the next slide, we're going to talk about how greenways have transformed spaces as well in urban areas. Many of our urban streams and waterways just kind of became forgotten and dilapidated. And then we can see in the next slide the transition, the dramatic transition. This is the same place that making these kind of places, people places, can do. And then as we go forward, we're going to look at kind of as the Greenways Evolution Part B, which is really looking beyond just recreation, but at ecological greenways and multi-objective projects, where we began to look at greenways not only as recreation, but as broader green infrastructure in terms of a number of different kinds of benefits. And let's look at some of those. Water management, in terms of how water flows and keeping it clean, water quality, creating wetlands and places to store water, and what we call polishing water. In other words, removing some of the contaminants. Greenways could also function as flood control spaces. There's a whole movement that was initiated by Kung Jian Yu, a landscape architect in China, but other urbanists have picked this up, where we think of cities as more absorptive places rather than just paved over with impermeable surfaces. And there's been a really wide movement in China and other places now to create broader open spaces and landscaping along the edges of roads with greenery and surfaces that can absorb runoff water as a way to reduce flooding and even vast wetlands being set aside. There are also places to create urban forestry. These might be forest nodes, kind of little micro forests or mini forested areas in cities, or even the landscaping along the edges where flora and fauna can flourish. So that's another benefit. And of course, there's the health and healing consideration as a spin-off of the Greenway movement, just getting people out exercising more, feeling healthier, both physically and mentally. Connectivity, and by connectivity here, I mean linking communities and people together, being able to move around in the environment, and also connecting different habitat areas together, routes of migration. There's even been a whole movement of these larger greenways, these mega greenways, particularly where wildlife, bird life can circulate and migrate to find food, to find breeding grounds, and the other benefits that come with being able to travel across what has become an increasingly fragmented landscape because of road building and other barriers. Greenways can actually also serve as emergency access and egress routes. Sometimes in emergencies, the street system can be just totally blocked. And that's where these pathways and trails along rail lines and rivers and so on might be ways that emergency vehicles can move about the city. Environmental education and the notion of stewardship and instilling that is another kind of spin-off opportunity of this phase B of greenways. And even places for hunting and fishing can be integrated into greenways as we look at them as they're evolving. And then let's take a look at yet another level of evolution. Before we do that, though, let's consider the alternative futures that the Greenway movement has put in front of us. This is kind of typical of what it was like back in the 1970s along many urban rivers and streams. And Greenways has transformed this, as we'll see in the next slide, into where there are opportunities. We can go beyond this notion of channelizing things with concrete just to carry water from here to there, to greenways being a differently designed space for our waterways. In the next slide, let's take a look at that image of, really what things could be looking like in the future, rather than these single purpose engineered solutions that we saw that hopefully we're evolving out of. And let's look at the next slide. We also can improve the opportunity for water recreation, and in the process improve waterways for the aquatic creatures, the fish and the insects and the bird life. This is kind of typical of what waterways were looking like a generation back, and some places, sadly, it still does. But we've looked at ways to transform those waterways, design solutions that allow us to, as we'll see in the next slide, get a greener solution that's a win-win. Not only can recreationalists go through these dams that we've designed for paddling and recreation, but also the fish can migrate this way, instead of dams being a blockade that prohibits that movement and that connectivity. Next slide, please. This illustration shows just a really easy way of looking at that. This was the typical trapezoidal kind of tunnel vision engineering solution that we saw kind of in those concrete channels I showed earlier. But we can look at terraced solutions, as the next slide will show. It's just it's not that complicated. Just having different levels, which is what nature does, to allow different kinds of vegetation and stream edge riparian habitat to evolve. Next slide, please. So we can also think of the human impact. This is kind of typical of what we saw a generation ago, and we still see it in places. Kids just don't have access to these, kind of landscapes, these play landscapes that can get them back in touch with nature. Greenways can allow that alternative solution when we think in terms of trapezoidal channel design and other types of collaborative efforts between landscape architects, planners, and engineers. And let's look at the next slide. Places that are a different kind of alternative future. Next slide, please. And again, that view of really what we want to strive for as we think about ecological greenways. Next slide, please. And it's a great opportunity also for volunteer and educational activities. This is a project that we did near Denver along Sand Creek next to an oil refinery, actually. And what we did is we did that trapezoidal channel design where we laid back terraces. And then we arranged with a bunch of school kids and their parents and teachers to come in and replant this area with the various appropriate wetland species. In the next slide, you'll see there's the kids building pride and building a better future for themselves. And the next slide shows how that area has changed just through that effort of just thinking a little differently. It's not that hard to do. It's just getting out of silo thinking about all the different benefits in a more holistic way. Next slide, please. And here's some volunteers improving trout fishery habitat in streams just by notching drop structures that allow the fish to migrate. And again, it benefits more than just the fish. It benefits all the bird life and the animals and the other critters that live along these corridors. And next slide, please. Again, it's just aesthetically more pleasing to have this kind of look. Next slide, please. And of course, the recreational benefits. Next slide, please. We also can think of this in the way we design our communities. We've had the more traditional way of laying out development, where each lot is isolated and all the space is taken up. The alternatives to cluster, to create a greenway space by combining the occupied areas into clustered as a residential development, and then preserving a recreational amenity, which actually makes these properties more valuable, makes the communities more marketable. There's so many benefits from coming from just thinking about this ahead of time in this notion of connectivity. Next slide, please. And this is a cross-section of how we might think about that in a residential development. Again, that terraced notion. We like to imagine our spaces. I like to see at least three tree canopies wide, so that we can have the bird life and the other creatures that live in the treetops. It also provides screening for the people that maybe enjoy a trail along this corridor. You kind of fit the trail in, as the slide shows. And those trees and vegetation kind of screen the surrounding development, so you have a more natural feel. Next slide, please. And this is an example. This is a project, Ken Carroll Ranch, where I happen to live, where the housing was clustered, and a greenway was created by setting aside that open space. It's just getting ahead of it and thinking of it ahead of time. Next slide, please. And of course, these corridors are opportunities for artistic and cultural expression, and we always want that in the package when we think of evolving greenways. Next slide, please. Now we're going to take a look at the next generation that I've been thinking about, and I wrote about in my book, the notion of a different kind of geometry that we can add as a layer, increasing accessibility. And I call them grand loops and town walks. And let's talk a little bit about that. We know that walking, and increasingly we're seeing articles just all over the place about the health benefits, just the simple way you can feel better just by walking routinely. There's so many ways, just mental, spiritual, cardiovascularly. We can think about just better thinking. I know I get some of my ideas when I'm out just going for a walk, helping you sleep better. There's just so many benefits that longevity. There's even articles that say it can help stave off Alzheimer's. So how do we do that? How do we accomplish that benefit of having these increased spaces? Yes, we have the greenways and rail trails and things like that, but they're kind of limited to those corridors. And so I'm kind of proposing let's go beyond that, put another layer in. Next slide, please. But this does take infrastructure to do it. Next slide, please. And this different geometry is doable. And there's a number of reasons why it might even be more doable in some ways than more traditional greenways and multi-use urban trails, the mostly paved urban trails that have been built over the past generation or so. Next slide, please. I'm thinking here more about walking for these kinds of facilities. It doesn't mean that bikes can't be part of it or bikes are prohibitive. I just think it's for each community to think about that, and how they want to do it and make those decisions. But by walking, I mean hiking, trekking, running, all the different modes of foot travel that people can engage in. Next slide, please. So anyway, the two elements, as I mentioned earlier, that I'm proposing is one is grand loop trails, which is kind of the evolution of greenways, where we have a trail or a greenway that wraps around the edges of a city, where the city meets the countryside. One of my colleagues kind of described it as taking the Appalachian Trail and wrapping it around a city. It's out on the edges, but because it's right on the edges of a city, you can easily get to it. And it almost becomes kind of the beginnings of a green belt. It's an urban defining kind of thing, a trail that goes all around the city along the edges. And then we can see those as linking some of the green nodes that already tend to exist out on the edges of cities. Many cities have state parks and county parks and larger preserve areas out on the edges. We could maybe tie those together with a grand loop trail that would be almost kind of like an emerald necklace. And then the other end of the spectrum would be closer in what I call town walks, because we want to really encourage for health benefits and just enjoyment, daily access every day, routine access to places to just enjoy the outdoors. And so I proposed town walks, which are also loops like the Grand Loop, but they're smaller and they connect neighborhoods, civic spaces, and social destinations. And I think of all of these as kind of a new kind of overlay park. A Grand Loop Trail might be kind of a regional overlay park, whereas the town walks could be like the community parks, neighborhood parks, even like a Vest Park. There even be doorstep walks.
Again, Grand Loops where city meets countryside. I've proposed a number of different types of configurations, and it can go way beyond this. It's really up to your own creativity to figure out these things. One can be trails that stay on the edges of cities. Some might be hybrids that go into the city area, but then out to the countryside. We can create wedges out to the edges by using the existing trails and greenway networks and have connections that follow them out to a grand loop on the edge of town. Some folks I've talked to have even proposed a daisy chain of sub-loops, which are smaller loops. Some of these might be actually mountain biking parks or equestrian riding areas. So the options are really up to your creativity in terms of what you want to see happen. At first I thought, oh, maybe this idea is just crazy. But when I started to research it, I noticed there's one in Phoenix, Las Vegas is building one, Louisville is building one, there's one in Rio de Janeiro, which is pretty amazing. Portland actually, with the Olmsteds, developed one over 100 years ago called the 40-mile loop that they're building on. And then I did a series of thought experiments looking at these around some different cities. And I'll get into that in the Q&A later. Michelle, let me know if I'm going too long to give me a 5-minute shout. I don't want to take other people's time. Paris is actually building one called the Little Belt, which follows an old rail line in Paris, which is a loop of greenery there. And these can be an alternative, the grand loops, to the more crowded, harder to get to outdoor destinations, national parks, national forests, that are increasingly overcrowded and it's just harder to get to them. They're not accessible to a lot of people. Town walks are for everyday outings, routine exercise and solace, as I mentioned. It's really something you need to do every day. I walk every single day, rain or shine. And it's just the health benefits have just been amazing. These town walks can take different configurations. Here's a few I suggest. I'm sure you might have lots of other ways to do these. Destination ones are focused on maybe some iconic destination. Maybe it's a loop around the state capitol or a loop around a particular historic or iconic place in town. Community ones are kind of like community parks. They might be more tricked out, fancy walking loops that you can get to within maybe 10, 15 minutes of your home. And then maybe certainly doorstep walks. Every doorstep should be a trailhead where you just walk out your door and you have a walking loop. You can create these yourself. Sometimes in many communities, the infrastructure is not there. So we need policies to expand walkability with not only having walks that get you from here to there, but pleasant spaces that are going to make people want to use them. That's key. These can configure in many ways, as I said. We can have larger loops. Maybe it's a 10K walk for the more ambitious people. I read about a 70-year-old guy the other day that's walking 10 to 14 miles a day, or subloops that maybe are 3K or less, just so you get that daily activity. We can maybe attach them and hang them off of greenways, and so they become subloops off of existing greenways. We might attach them to transit stops, so you can take the transit, if a train or a bus, to a stop and do a loop in an area, and then hop on the train or the bus to go to the next place. So there's all kinds of options. But again, the goal is to make every doorstep a trailhead. One example I really like is one in Tucson called the Turquoise Trail, that two ladies with the Historic Society, and they got a hold of some paint the city had, and it was simple as just painting a stripe along the sidewalks into a loop around historic Tucson. And if you guys go to Tucson, it's the way to experience that city. But certainly in San Antonio or any other place, this is a basic way that just a few citizens and a little bit of paint, and obviously getting some community cooperation, can build these things. Or you can go fancy, like Denver's proposed 5280 trail. This might be a $100 million grand loop, destination loop around core Denver. And the funding is now in place to get that one started. So there's all different levels too in between that you can do. As I said, greenways are linear, rivers, ridge lines, rails, and trails. I like to say they follow the grain of the terrain that's defined by topography. Grand loops go against the grain, and town walks do too. They are, because they're loops, they have a different shape, but I think that brings more access and connectivity to people. And with a foot travel emphasis, they may be a little bit easier to build, when you're going against the grain. You shape them by the opportunity and the experience that's available. They can link nodes, as I mentioned earlier, like around Phoenix and other places, into a daisy chain. So they're kind of the beginning of green belts in a way too, or a green charm bracelet. Maybe they connect state parks or open space preserves on the edges of cities. So there's lots of ways that this can be done, forming networks. And the key is that they can provide and should provide diverse, equitable access to different ages, abilities, income groups, ethnic groups, so that everybody feels comfortable using these. And I'll talk a little bit about the accessibility thing a little bit later. That's a little bit more of a challenge with grand loops, but there's ways around it. And there's the notion of also lightweight and ultralight travel, which is an emerging kind of trend now, that instead of carrying a 50-pound backpack, we want to find ways to travel just with a day pack, maybe some water and a snack, and just the basics that you need, so you're not burdened. Particularly, just some people don't have the physical capability to carry a heavy pack too. And one of the things that that grand loops can allow you to do, because they're on the edges of town, there are a lot of hamlets and villages and smaller cities on the edges of larger cities, and they have hotels and B&Bs, so you can plot a route and you don't have to build a campsite. You can even hop a Lyft or an Uber back home at night and then go back again the next day. Or maybe one day we'll see the equivalent of food trucks that come out and set up a campsite. So there's a whole industry that could grow around that. But because they're close in, they allow ultralight travel. Even more importantly is preserving the legacy of the right to roam. Increasingly, we're losing access to open spaces, and we're getting more and more confined, whether it's by freeways or no trespassing signs. More and more we're seeing that limitation. Building these things is also all about the experience. I said at the end of the day, I like to think I'm in the entertainment business. We want to put on a good show, compose a good tune. It's not just about getting from here to there. People need to enjoy that experience. And one of the things that's interesting about building these kinds of systems is the notion of perception. Really, you have to get inside the head of the people that are going to use these. You don't necessarily have to have a huge expanse of open space to have an open space experience. You can often within a 50 to 300 foot wide space create the sense of being in the wilderness by planting trees and shrubs and vegetation that screen the surrounding areas and create that sense of ruralness or wilderness kind of feel. And in places you can have the long views through different scenic conservation programs. The Appalachian Trail does this, where you do have those iconic vistas and rural landscapes that you also want to preserve as well. But you don't have to, it shouldn't stop you from building a corridor because maybe there's development around it. It's how you treat those doors of perception along the way. So these are just some characteristics of routes that we design and build. Obviously, I said it's got to be pleasant and stimulating. Waypoints are really important. Little mini destinations, little nodes where you stop along the way that give you a little destination. They connect things together that people might do daily, even just going to the coffee shop or the library or rec center. Those waypoints should be strategically placed, so you don't have to carry a lot of water with you or food, amenities, maybe it's just a 7-Eleven where you can stop and get something to eat. And then there's character districts. Think about as you're composing your tune, your melody, the different kind of spaces. It might be an urban space, it might be a rural space, it might be an artistic kind of bohemian space. See what you got there. The tread can really vary because we're emphasizing walking. It doesn't have to be a paved concrete surface in building these systems. It can be, but there's many other options, even snow we have a lot of it here in Denver, in the North Country. So there are those options. Ideally, I like to see a corridor where two people can walk side by side. My colleague, Tony Boone, he's a trail builder, calls it WWHH, which means walking hand in hand. So it's just a nice way if we want to have a good experience. You can't always achieve this, but it's a goal. And ideally separating the bike uses and the ped uses so you get that flow. The walkers have that flow of not worrying about a bike coming up behind them, and the bikers have that flow, which is a different speed than walkers. So that's something to take into account. These are some typical cross sections. My colleague Dan Burden talks about this with complete streets, having a tree median, really thinking about that space that buffers you from the automobile traffic. But speaking of automobiles, many times this system can actually use streets. There are many streets in cities and towns with low volumes and low speeds where you can just walk in the street, and people are doing it already. You just want to make sure it's safe and have a plan if those streets get busier. I talked about the creature comforts and necessities. Some are very basic, but some people just don't think about some of these things. Particularly restrooms come to mind. If you're out for a trek, you need, sometimes you got to just stop and take care of nature. Shelter and shade, particularly with climate change, and places to duck out if a storm comes up, and places to camp for the night, but maybe it's not a campsite, but maybe you plan it so there's B&Bs along the way. It's all in the way you plan it, but we want to overcome the notion of range anxiety. To get people out using it, they need to feel that they can find those kinds of amenities. And wayfinding is key. People need that security of knowing where they're going, finding their way. And wayfinding does not need to be complex. I don't like relying totally on the
Bob, we just have a few more minutes.
This is to get away from looking at your cell phone. So I think very basic, simple wayfinding can be provided. It might be like the ladies did in Tucson, just turquoise paint, or it could be a simple sign, or it might be something embossed into the pavement that tells you where you are or where you're going. This is the Kamano Kodo Trail below. They went big time with their wayfinding. This is a great walking route, by the way, in Japan. And this has, it's kind of an iconic megalith that attracts you, but it's wayfinding, so you can go at all levels. And then as I talked about the creature comforts along the way, pretty obvious. Just think about all the things you might need if you're out for a couple hours on a sunny day or even not a sunny day. And they should be convenient and regularly spaced. They could be provided by the Parks Department or a public agency, or it might be as simple as a Wendy's or somewhere, where you can stop, and for the cost of buying, something to drink, you have access to the restroom. Be flexible how you think about that. We want to think about these as being accessible. In the case of Grand Loops, sometimes these are more wildernessy kind of trails. They may not always be accessible to all people, but then what we do is try and provide an alternate route that is accessible, that maybe goes around some of those tight spots. So there are ways to do this. Michelle, let me know if I'm, when I got about 3 or 4 minutes left, I don't want to go too long here.
Yeah,
There's
we're
the
about ready
question
to
of
wrap
getting
up.
people engaged. A lot of people don't participate. There are tens of millions of people who don't regularly exercise. How do we get those people to engage?
Bob, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
We're about ready to wrap up this section whenever you are.
Okay, I will do that. Yeah, I'm there. So anyway, we'll talk about some of these other issues, some of these kinds of attractions, the use of Lyft and Uber to get around, and getting across critical barriers. And these are an investment. They pay off. And $4 trillion in healthcare cost savings. And I just want to say, in Texas, there's a $47.6 billion outdoor recreation economy. So these things are investments. And thank you, Michelle. And I will hand it off to the other panelists. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bob. And we can go back to any of those slides
No
as
worries.
questions come up.
You bet.
As we reset in here, I'll just quickly introduce these guys, unless you guys want to quickly introduce yourself if you think that would be easier. Brandon, do you want to go first?
Sure. You want to?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Is it on?
It's on.
Okay. I'm Brandon Ross. I'm with the San Antonio Parks Department. And did everybody get a brochure? Okay, so I'm going to just talk real quickly about kind of some of the things Bob said and how they fit within our local context of the greenways that I'm working on. Howard Peak was mayor back in the late 1990s and early 2000. He got the first sales tax money in San Antonio that was specifically dedicated to the greenways. And then the voters thankfully approved that 3 other times after that. And now we're bond funded. So we've had plenty of money coming into this program. We've built 102 miles worth of trails to date, and we've got another 30 miles in design and more. We've got a couple of miles under construction and more to come after that. Thankfully, it's been very, very well supported by the San Antonio public, the voters, and the city council and the leadership all around, and Bexar County as well. So like I said, I guess on the Grand Loop idea, that's sort of what we're playing at here. It's kind of like the wedges to edges was one of the diagrams that Bob showed a minute ago. I would just say structurally, what we're trying to do is do the loop around the city, which goes through a lot of densely populated neighborhoods. In addition to the actual loop around the city, there's also the Westside Creeks, which are in the middle of the city, which Rebecca and Skye are going to speak to in just a minute about the restoration of the Westside Creeks. But the Westside Creeks tie in with the Mission Reach and the rest of the San Antonio River trails that go up into the Riverwalk and north along the Museum Reach. And so we've been able to thus far tie the Leon Creek Greenway Trail system, which is on the far west side, up with the Salado Creek Greenway system on the north and the east side to create what's now a 40-mile continuous segment of trail there. There's about 38 miles if you go from the Medina River Natural Area all the way past Casson Lake and Mitchell Lake and up onto the Mission Reach and so forth, and go up through downtown and either into the west side or up to Brackenridge Park. So that's another really great connected piece. and we're just kind of piecing these things together piece by piece here. We're still working on connecting through Fort Sam Houston. San Antonio River Authority is working with Bexar County funding. Bexar County's come to the table with money to try to help us get some of these other segments built on Leon South and Salado South. And we're just basically plugging away. I know quality was also something that Bob talked about, and we're always trying to up our game in terms of trailhead amenities and in terms of tree plantings. Thankfully, the Parks Department is stewards to the Tree Mitigation Fund. So when developers come in and chop down trees, which they have a bad habit of doing, they pay into the mitigation fund, and we get the benefits of that money so that we can turn around and plant a lot of trees in place of the trees that were lost, inch for inch. We plant those trees, provide irrigation to those trees, and that's now incorporated almost every project that we do in terms of both the greenway trails and the parks in San Antonio. That's a major component now of what we're doing. So shade, of course, is really important. That was something else he talked about. We're Texas heat, everybody knows how hot it is and everything like that. So during the summer especially, we're trying to provide a lot of shade and trees and shade structures and other types of amenities. We've got great partnerships in San Antonio between the county and San Antonio River Authority and the Parks Department at the city and even the Public Works Department. We're trying to now try to branch into street connections to bike lanes and shared use paths along our major roadways and different kind of complete streets ideas where all these things start to tie together so that we're creating a connected network of bike and pedestrian mobility around the city of San Antonio. One of our goals at the Parks Department at the city of San Antonio is to create a 10-minute walk to every park, like for every resident to be able to have a 10-minute walk to a park. We already have like 260 parks in San Antonio, so we have a lot of park availability, but we're trying to make it more equitable, more availability for people to be able to walk and to be able to enjoy themselves without having to be dependent upon a vehicle. So that's my 5-minute spiel, and I'll give it to Rebecca.
Thank you, Brandon. I think I'm just gonna sit for mine, if you don't mind. So I'm Rebecca Krug. I'm the Senior Project Manager for the Westside Creeks Ecosystem Restoration Project. The San Antonio River Authority is the non-federal sponsor. Our federal sponsor is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And this project, the idea for the project started close to 20 years ago, and my counterpart Skye is going to be talking about that in just a minute. But I wanted to talk about the overall ecosystem restoration project and tying it back to Robert's presentation. I made a few notes. One of the first ones he mentioned, water is typically viewed as a nuisance in the city, and that is the case with the channelization of the Westside Creeks. So San Antonio as a whole, and especially on the west side, over decades have experienced catastrophic flooding, loss of life, and the San Antonio Channel Improvements Project, which started in the 50s, completed about the 1980s, was the sole purpose to channelize naturally occurring streams. So there are 4 creeks on the west side that larger watershed drain into the San Antonio River. And so those 4 creeks are Alazan Creek, Martinez Creek, San Pedro Creek, and Apache Creek. And those that were historically naturally meandering through the west side communities, and people used to be able to access them for fishing and gathering other herbs and things, and just overall recreation and community gathering space. For the purposes of mitigating loss of life and future significant flood impacts to that area, those creeks were channelized into that trapezoidal shape image that Robert shared in his presentation. So water as a nuisance, trying to convey it as quickly as possible out of the community. And it served that benefit to remove those floodwaters quickly from the neighborhoods. However, it did had some other unintended consequences. It disconnected neighborhoods. It took out streets and easy pathways that people used to be able to walk across the creek or in through shallow sections to get to the other side. Now are these very wide channels, and that really created a lot of disconnectedness. And also the ecosystem, the natural habitat that existed historically is no longer there. So one of the primary goals of the ecosystem restoration, this federal project that was funded in 2022 with president budget funding as well as bipartisan infrastructure law funding, to restore the 4 Westside Creeks to a more natural state. So we're going to be restoring the creeks by creating a more healthier aquatic ecosystem and having native vegetation, woody vegetation, as well as prairie grasses and other forbs to attract beneficial wildlife. Primarily the species of concern the feasibility study was looking at was migratory avian species. The San Antonio area is in the Central Flyway, so creating extra habitat for those birds to rest on the way through their migration. Another topic that Robert mentioned was healthy benefits of walking. So the West Side has this was part of the feasibility study that was done in like 2012, well before the project became officially funded. They did some research on the West Side community and found that they have much higher rates of childhood obesity and other health problems. So the ecosystem component is a very important one of the federal project, but there's also a component of environmental justice and providing access to nature. And through the trails that have already been constructed and additional amenities that are going to be added, recreational features with the project, they're going to allow the West Side community to come back, enjoy the creeks, have the opportunity to glean some health benefits and enjoy nature. And that also goes into the third bullet I had written down from his presentation about equity and diversity. And I think that would be a good segue to the function of the Oversight Committee within the project and kind of how the desire to restore the creeks came about.
Hi, everybody. I'm Skye. I'm actually one of the co-chairs for the San Antonio River Authority Oversight Committee for the Westside Creeks. How I grew up in the West Side. My house is literally right behind the Apache Creek. It was my grandmother's house. I inherited it, and I just grew up. Now, give a background about the West Side. At that time, it was just primarily was a low-income neighborhood, full of gangs, violence, drug users. We were just very ignored. And I remember very early on when I mentioned Julian Castro was still mayor or had just become mayor. And I remember there being a little bit of, hey, there's going to be a bond. We need the votes for some, project in the West Side. And I remember going knocking door to door, and, so many residents just, even I couldn't comprehend it. Like, what is it? What is it that they're doing? Is it like a little park and some benches and that's it? Because we were so used to empty promises. And we were so used to being ignored and being looked at almost like trash, like, ugh, the West Side, you're the, and so little by little, I became more and more involved. And as the projects, proceeded and we started getting things into fruition, we could see the actual changes in the neighborhood. And a good example is the Elmendorf Lake Park. I will say, because my house was, within a mile. When we used to walk, and at that time you really couldn't walk. It was not safe. It was not safe at all. And that's where also you see a lot of why there's that childhood obesity, because parents aren't going to let their kids walk around in neighborhoods where they could see something dangerous or something dangerous can happen to them. But I will say, from my personal view, I went from seeing a park that literally no families utilize. You wouldn't see people walking around. A very vivid moment that I had remembered is seeing a gentleman. Unfortunately, he was on something and he couldn't even stand up. Okay, that's how bad it was. Now, and it fills my heart. After church on Sunday, when I'm leaving Mass, I pass right by it, and it is filled with children and families utilizing it. And I remember during the times when we would have the, public input meetings, we still couldn't comprehend, because the first and foremost thing was safety, 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 safety. So, and what was told to us is when the people come, safety will come. And I was skeptical. I'll be honest, I was very skeptical about that. I was like, if people are walking around, that's going to be, but it actually worked. It really did. Having the people out, having people utilize the neighborhood, not only changed the crime level, I would say, but also just a sense of pride in your neighborhood. Just being able to say, yeah, I'm from the West Side, or, being able to walk outside and do things with your family that we couldn't do before. So I'm very happy and proud of being part with Sarah for as long as I have been, I think a little over 10 years. And so to be able to see that change has been a positive impact.
So I thought we could just open it up for any questions the audience may have. If there's any questions online, Sam, maybe you can ask us or let us know. But, as students of environmental, urban and regional planning, we're always constantly looking for ways to improve our community. For some of the things that you've heard today, greenways are a great example of that. I also work for the San Antonio River Authority, and we work in green infrastructure. And so looking at how we do that, in greenways, improving, we're right out here. Right out here is the San Antonio River. So you're able to have that connectivity. This space that we're in, Confluence Park, captures all of the rainwater. So it's a great confluence of a lot of different things. Were you gonna say something?
No.
Oh, I thought you were raising your hand.
No. Thank you.
So please, do you guys have questions? Sam, I know you've got plenty. That's my cohort.
Yeah. I guess I can start. I
Okay,
mean, I just wonder about, like, I'm sure it takes a lot of coordination with landowners, to build something like a brand loop, so I'm wondering about, like, maybe how do rights of way kind of go about, how do you coordinate with different people? I know it's probably a difficult task, but what's like a, kind of conversations that.
Do you want me to take this?
Sure, go ahead.
I have experience with that, and sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't. I would just say we have had some really great experiences with a lot of really generous folks who have donated property to the program, especially near the rim and UTSA in that area. We've had a lot of donations. Every property between the rim and Eisenhower Park was done through a donation, with the exception of one, which we bought for Edwards Aquifer Protection and put the trail through it. So, we've had a lot of great experiences and made friends along the way with some of the landowners that we've dealt with. Sometimes it can be very difficult because we don't get responses from the landowners. There may be absentee landowners that don't even live in San Antonio. Some people don't even know they own the property. And so tracking them down is difficult. Some are just out to see how much money they can get. So there's different things that go on. I would just say that the difficult ones can be very difficult and time consuming. And, we're trying to streamline that a little bit, because I think the 2022 bond that we're working off of has a little bit more stringent schedule requirements, that we stay on schedule more. So we're trying to be a little bit more mechanical about that relationship instead of it being more organic, which we prefer. But it does take several years sometimes to make those land deals. And it's just always a work in progress. But as long as you kind of know the Texas law and the basic steps, a lot of it, the rest of it really is just the art of relationship building.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or thoughts?
First off, like in 2005, I moved away from San Antonio. I didn't come back for 17 years. And I've lived in lots of places that have greenways and that are older cities that you can walk. So when I came back to San Antonio, I was still like, it's my home, but I'm like, it's so backwards in terms of being able to, go on greenways. But I didn't realize that all this had happened, like all the greenways. And so it's really inspiring. And I really applaud the city for sure. But in your statement about, thinking about the 10-minute commute or for cities. I just think about, I live on the north side and I love to ride my bike, and I'm just wondering, like, how do we get involved? Like, I mean, I'm just thinking of my area, like, you know, there's different parks, but yeah, how do you, as a citizen, engage with the city in like your particular area for greenways or help advocate?
Is there an essay speak up? Is that-
Yeah, well, there's that. Yeah, there's SA Speak Up, but yeah, I mean, I think just contacting, you can contact me. Margarita Hernandez is here. She also works on the greenways in San Antonio with me, and you know, we can talk, or you know, there's other avenues. There's, you know, if we're building something in your neighborhood or anywhere near your neighborhood, normally we put out information about that project and so forth. But if not, and you just want to have a conversation, we're open to that.
Yeah, I mean, I've drawn a blank, but I mean, you know, there's like McAllister and Lawrence Creek, and it would be great to, I mean, but there's a lot of little creeks like that in our area, and I'm sure all over the city. And
If you shoot us an email, we'll share with you the map that we have of the current trails that have been built and the trails that are in proposed condition. Either you're designing them or they are going to be designed, or in partnerships with their county instead, or with the San Antonio River Authority. So you'll see all those different trails planned, and you can see, because you mentioned Lawrence Creek, you know, we are currently working on that Mud Creek Trail already. We have it, we've done the design, we're gonna wait for the 2027 bond to do the construction, so, or in parallel with the county project. So we have different things that are in the works that we don't necessarily, you know, share all the time, but they're on the website. Also, I wanna remind everybody, just because I attended the walk and bike night at the NPO Wednesday night, they are getting ready to do a second round, the bike network plan, which is out of the transportation department of the city of San Antonio. They're getting ready to do a second round of public outreach. So that's your method also, right? To provide feedback and say, look, we're looking for safe bike lanes, to be able to access the greenways or be able to access stores and, you know, grocery stores, restaurants, key infrastructure that, you know, will benefit communities. So that would be your way, a mechanism that you can make your thoughts, put your thoughts there, and request, you know, infrastructure. And then every year during the budget process, I know sometimes we're all so busy, you know, we work full days and then in the evenings we're exhausted, but the budget process is also a good way that you can go and voice what you want to see out there, what your tax dollars should be spending on.
I like you mentioned Mud Creek. My girlfriend's father lives in that area right next to it. And, you know, you talk to him and the people in the neighborhood, because you know, they don't view that as a resource. They're like fearful of it. But it sounds like there's some plan to make a better trail through it. And
yes.
I mean, like your comment about, and when I did my master's, I heard another story, Skye in Washington, D.C., but talk about reclaiming a park or areas, and then they just magically become safer.
I will say it's just showing up.
Yeah.
I went from just being a resident, a citizen, and of course helping, you know, getting some of the votes for one of the bonds, because there's a lot of entities have to come together to get this done. But just showing up, and at that time, really back, social media wasn't as big as it is now. That's how I was able to be, you know, get on the committee. However, now it's easier. You just go on, you know, Facebook or Instagram, you look up San Antonio River Authority, sign up, get emails, and they will email you when things, and what one of the things I really enjoy, what I've expressed that I really like, is now we have a lot of hybrid meetings. So before it was all in person. That wasn't very convenient for people. I mean, I had a 2-year-old at the time, and I would lug her into the meetings literally in a car seat. And now, you can voice your opinion from the comfort of your own home and just log in and kind of share what what your thoughts are. But I will say that is the biggest challenge, is getting people involved. I know Sarah's really good at sending postcards and emails and putting notices on public events. But it's also a matter of people have actually being interested and kind of coming in.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about my girlfriend's father and the people in that neighborhood. I mean, there's probably a plan for it, but they have no idea about it. And it would make the park
I think
safer
Brennan
to
can
them.
speak about the public outreach. that
Yeah, I
we're
mean, normally we don't start having a lot of real conversations with people until the money's on the table and we're ready to start actually doing some design. But when that happens and we're ready to move forward with the project, then we will be engaging the homeowners associations, all of the boards of the homeowners associations, going to their meetings, having our own public meetings, and sharing some of that information out. So if it's, the neighborhoods surrounding Mud Creek, that is on the books, and that's something that we're going to be working with those HOAs on. It's just a matter of time.
And I'll share a quick story. I know we're all pressed for time. Just really quick. I used to work in public works, right? Heavy infrastructure, and the engineers just bulldoze everything that we could, build the stuff. And we never had like residents that would come and say, "Yay for public works."
Mm-hmm.
You could have like 5 people in that room, and they all wanted to kill you, And one thing that coming here to parks and working under Brandon, that I saw that they did a good job in building trust with the community. And we have a resident, right, that goes to some of the meetings where people don't want the project. They're like, "No, you're gonna bring crime. There's all these people gonna be, snooping in my backyard." And then this resident comes, and he used to be an HOA president in a private neighborhood where the trail went through the back, right? And immediately those residents were like, "Oh, not in my backyard." But through conversations and working with Brandon and, having that plan and giving information, this man comes to our meeting to say, "Look, I can tell you, I can vouch for the city parks department that when they commit to working with the community, they work with them and ensure that the project is done, mindfully, and that it is a good project," right? He shares that they were all skeptical. They thought all this crime was coming to their neighborhood with, the trail being in back. He said it never materialized. People that walk there are people that are utilizing it the right way. And it is true. The time that you activate a space, it is when the crime decreases, when the dumping decreases. And so it is a positive, and until they see it, right? But once they hear it from a peer of theirs, it's different. And Brandon and I get up there, we can say all we want, but once one of their neighbors says, "Look, I can vouch for that." And Brandon has been really good in building a program like that. So, yeah, thank you so much for sharing. That's a perfect note to end on. You guys get involved. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add on that the oversight committee for the project, was involved with the idea, development, vision, study, feasibility planning, and now that we're into design, we really rely on them to help provide a voice from the community to inform the project on what are people interested in. We hosted a public information session about recreational features that are going to complement the project and what the community would like to see in terms of where we might have needed connectivity access points. And we're fortunate to have an active oversight committee to stay involved and engaged throughout the process. And for more information about the Westside Creeks project, we have a website you can stay informed. It's westsidecreeks.com. On the screen, perfect. And we have those oversight committee meetings are open to the public as well. So every month, the third Tuesday at 6:00 in the River Authority boardroom. So if you want to come learn more about the project and how community organizing engagement works, welcome to join us.
Awesome, thank you so much. So now we'd like to do the quick raffle. Sam's going to do it online. Yeah, you already did it? You're awesome. Very cool. Will you announce the winner?
Kenya Felder. Congrats,
Woo!
Kenya.
Congratulations. She's one of our classmates. So awesome. Thanks for joining.
Whoops. And does everybody in here have a ticket? Okay, let's pass out the rest of these guys. We're going to raffle in here. While we're doing that, we'd like to say thank you for your questions with the River Authority medal. And we'll give one to Margarita as well.
Yeah, Margarita.
And here's for Kenya. Margarita, you get one for being involved and asking questions and giving us more information. Everybody else? Everybody got their raffle? One more. Dun, 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 drum roll. Anybody else have any other thoughts while we wrap this up? Oh, big thank you, Bob, online. Let me see if I can get you to be sharing your screen now so we can see you. Thank you so much for saying that. To one of our.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes. I'm just going to try to show your screen.
That can be frightening.
Exit. Where is exit? Does anybody know? Aha. Ha ha ha. All right. Where is it?
The bar at the top, maybe?
So show, yeah, maybe show. I guess I don't need to talk into this. Show video. Stop sharing. That's a great idea. Oh, we are stopped sharing. Nope, stop share. Yay, there you are, Bob. I think we did.
Hi, everybody. I see my fellow panelists. You guys are great.
It was such a pleasure to have you. We're going to be raffling your book now. Gallery, thank you. Gallery. Awesome. Okay, who wants to pick? Should you pick? Okay, our guest. And you're like, don't drop the winning ticket on the ground. Would you like to do the honors?
Sure. I'll try. 339-3353.
Karen, yay! Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yay. Okay, you guys are welcome to hang out, have some more food, have some drinks, talk to our guests. Thank you again for coming out. It was such a pleasure to have you. Yay.